Hello everybody, welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 salary preview show. Hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas, got everything that you wanted from Santa Claus, no lumps of coal in the stockings. We are here to get a feel for or finalize, if you are further along in your research, your PGA season-long drafts that are coming up. Have a lot of great info for you all. Will be good to go through, look at some particular players. I'll also give you my general strategies. Of course, always good to be maneuverable throughout that, but there are certainly some general strategies that I try to employ anytime I am in a season-long fantasy draft for golf. I specifically am going to be focusing on a salary draft, meaning that you can have as few or as many players as you want, as long as you're within the salary threshold. But if you have regular or snake style draft questions, by all means feel free to throw those in chat as well. But I'm going to be focusing on my preferred format, the one that I play the most of, which is salary drafts. So I'll get into that here in a little bit, but let's get through the intro. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is simply the best tool out there. Look, there are a lot of great tools, a lot of great articles and statistics sites and all of that out there at your disposal. I just simply believe that Fantasy National is the best. It's going to make you a much smarter gambler and a much better DFS player. Go check them out. It's well worth your investment. In the description to the video, there are links to all of my social media, Twitter and Instagram, where I posted my updated schedule earlier today. Twitter is where I also post my betting cards starting next week with the Tournament of Champions, so that will be returning, as well as research throughout the week. I will post the summary of that research to Instagram and Twitter, so give me a follow at those places. But if you want to be a part of the research live, then give me a follow at Twitch, as I am live every Monday and Tuesday morning, generally around 10 a.m. Eastern. Twitch is also where I do a little bit of my side content if I'm, playing a game or whatever. But with the golf season coming up, and then right around the corner will be baseball, I will be online at Twitch doing a whole lot of research here at the beginning of the year. So a lot of exciting times coming up. Hope you consider dropping by if you want to be a part of the nitty gritty and see a lot of the in-depth research that I do. So give me a follow there as well. Finally, we are live. Chat's open. I do want any and all of your questions. Throw it in chat. How was your Christmas? Did you get what you asked for? What was the big thing on the wish list this year? Do you have any New Year's resolutions coming up? All of that good stuff. How are you handling the seemingly countrywide chill that is going through, especially parts of the Midwest and upper Northeast? Hopefully you are staying safe and staying warm in that regard. But throw any questions you have in chat, referring around players or draft strategy, anything and everything. That is what we're here for, to prepare for our season-long drafts tonight. So let's get into it. Let's do our preview for the 2023 PGA calendar year. And as I mentioned a little bit in the intro, I'm going to be focusing on what are called salary drafts, whereas you have a finite amount of salary. In my instance, I have $35 million to pick however many players that you want to. You can pick 35 players that cost 1 million. You can pick 4 players that cost 10 and 5 million. However you want to go about it, that is my preferred way of playing season-long golf fantasy. I've been doing it for a few years now. A couple of years ago, I set our home league's record for money set in a year. The year Sam Burns really went off, Cam Davis won, all of that. It was a fantastic year, and actually, this is pretty much the origin of how I got into golf gambling in regards to picks and all that stuff. Is I started in year-long fantasy and then kind of migrated to weekly. But instead of rambling on, let's go ahead and move on over to Fantasy National. And unfortunately, Fantasy National is not updated for the new calendar year. So all we have is the 2022 PGA Players page view. As you can see here, I was hoping there would be a 2023. There is not yet. So this will still help serve a purpose tonight. The only thing will be to disregard the salary. Clearly, Cameron Young is not going to be zero. He's not going to be free. He had a monster year, as you can see by him finishing 11th in strokes gained total throughout 2022. But a couple of things to note here. The timeline for this set of data is 1/1 to 9/13, and 9/13 was kind of the cutoff point that I used for the Fortinet. So this is going to include the Tour Championship data. Sometimes I don't like to look at that since it's such a small field, but we do want to get as many players to East Lake as possible. That is the goal when you are drafting a salary team. It's just to make the most money that you can, and generally the most money is who's going to go to East Lake. So as you can see here, in the time period from the Tournament of Champions of 2022 to the Tour Championship, Rory was actually the #1 strokes gained total player. That shows you just how much Scottie Scheffler fell off late in the season last year. We'll take a look, and I mean, you can see here the Tour Championship was not good. BMW, the Travelers, and while there wasn't a whole lot of red, he wasn't putting up the astronomically high numbers that he was, say, in the Masters when he won, or the WGC match play when he won Wampo, for example. Just everything about that. He started to fall off a little bit, and he's kind of continued that on in the fall, although the fall won't matter for us too much. But I mean, you can see here, like the FedEx St. Jude where he missed the cut, the Open, as opposed to the Masters when he was gaining 12 strokes on Thursday and Friday, the Players, etc. So yeah, that is the custom date range that I have for this evening. Pardon me while I set some chat settings, and I do hope you join me in chat if you are able to. Would love to have any and all of those questions right on cue. James, how was your Christmas? Glad to see you make it in chat. How many weeks till the next tournament? TOC's next week. The Century Tournament of Champions is next week. So that reminds me that I will give you my schedule at the end of the show tonight. But got your flights canceled. Yeah, you and probably a whole lot of others dealing with all of that stuff. I hate to hear about it. Terrible situation, sucks. But things could always be worse. Fortunately, I didn't have much travel to do. Any travel I did was in driving distance. But thanks for jumping in chat as I hit my desk. Let me start with something that I began my research with when I went through preparing my salary team for 2023. And I went ahead and gathered all of this information. I went through each page view, and I'm not going to be able to do that tonight because as you change page views, it's going to change all of the metrics and filters, and I don't want to have to deal with all that. So we're just going to be looking at a high-level view when we talk about rankings and whatnot. But one thing that I wanted to do, since my league in particular starts at the Tournament of Champions, ends at the Tour Championship, I wanted to see who played the best during that time. And the initial thought would have been Scotty Scheffler. I mean, he made $14 million last year, most of that coming in the 2022 calendar year. But as you can see, Rory was actually strokes gained total number one. So in terms of total performance, your top 10 in 2022 were Rory, Scotty Scheffler, Matt Fitzpatrick, Justin Thomas, Will Zalatoris, Patrick Cantlay, Tony Finau, Jon Rahm, Cam Smith, and Xander Schauffele. Now, as we talk about the salary year coming up, it's important to note that, as I mentioned in the intro, know your league's rules. So my league in particular does not count anything from LIV. And let me finish that thought process that I'm on, James, and I'll get to you on my opinion of that. But since LIV earnings don't count, I am essentially not considering Cameron Smith a PGA Tour player. I don't consider Joaquin Niemann a PGA Tour player. Players of that ilk. And I also treat players like Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele and Mito Pereira, these other players that have been heavily linked to LIV, I treat them very, very differently than I do somebody like Rory, like Jon Rahm, like Tony Finau, who do not have the rumors swirling about them. And that is going to be my overarching way of approaching those players, is that I just avoid them, because as of right now there is no way that I see them back onto the PGA Tour. Jay Monahan and the PGA have not said anything to the fact of letting those players come back, so I have to treat them as if they are not going to play. So I will not draft them, I will not consider them, I avoid them. They're not there in regards for me. So it's important to note that when we go through, if I skip over players, they might have played well, say Cameron Smith and Patrick Cantlay or Xander Schauffele, but there's just either players like Cameron Smith and Joaquin Niemann, or if they are highly considered or speculated of going like Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele, then I will treat them different as well. What are my thoughts on LIV golfers playing at the Masters? As of right now, I really don't see a problem with it. The Masters is its own entity. Yes, that its event is part of the PGA Tour, but the Masters has long stood on its own, and they have their own criteria that is different than, say, the PGA Championship, the Open Championship, and the US Open. I don't have a problem with it. I think with all this LIV stuff, regardless of how you feel about where the money is and all that stuff, to me, golf is golf. Let the players play. And you want to see the best players in the world play the tournament. And that's what the Masters is supposed to be the best players in the world playing at Augusta. So I don't have an issue with it. I think it was a very measured response by Augusta National, saying that they kept their criteria the same for this year and they will reevaluate throughout 2023 in regards of evaluating how 2024 looks for criteria to play in the Masters. But I really don't have a problem with any of those live players or the guys that chose to play on the live tour. I have no problem with them playing the Masters. They're some of the best golfers in the world. If they qualify, they should be able to play. That is my opinion. But coming back to what's at hand tonight for drafting purposes, the thing that I wanted to do was to see who played well in the time period that my league is counting. So, take out the fall stats. And then I also wanted that to compare that with their salary and see who maybe over or underperformed their salary. And again, you'll have to ignore Fantasy National salary. This is based on last year's. So what I do have is this, and I'll have to change to Microsoft Excel. This is a listing of the player and the salary rounded up to the nearest 100,000. I'm probably going to have to zoom in for you all on that. Yeah, hopefully that is big enough now. That's the way the league that I participate in, that's how we do it, is we round up to the 100,000. So I think Scotty Scheffler made 14,080,000 something. So he becomes 14.1. That's how we do it in our league. This right here is just the amount of events that they played in that time period. So from 1/1/22 or the Tournament of Champions to the Tour Championship, how many events did they play? You'll see that I have some color coding here. Anyone blacked out is a live golfer. You see Cameron Smith, he actually made the second most money in 2022, including the fall. So he would have been the second most at 10.2 million. And I blacked him out, as I mentioned. I just don't consider any live golfers because as of right now they have no path back to the PGA Tour. Now, the players in red are players that have been linked to live. They might not be there right now, but there are rumors swirling. So Patrick Cantlay, Xander Schauffele, Cameron Young. Down here is Adam Scott. That's all the way down at the bottom. That's not what I wanted to do. But you have Adam Scott, Mito Pereira. There's a few others as well. But that is what the color coding is anybody in black, I've just went ahead and X'd them out. And then red have been highly linked to live. But I wanted to get a feel for, how much do they cost versus what was their actual strokes gained total performance. As you can see here, this is a spreadsheet that I've put together that shows the same players, blacked out if they were blacked out. I have not done the color coding for, say, Xander and Patrick Cantlay or whatever, but this is their salary, at least in my league. This is the number of rounds they played in 2022 from the time period that I'm focused on, which is the Tournament of Champions to the Tour Championship, and all of their various stats. Again, the biggest one was strokes gained total, but I have some other stats here. You can see strokes gained par 4, birdies are better, birdies gained, bogeys, off the tee approach. Let me tell you something that I found very, very interesting when I was doing some of my research. So I'm going to come all the way down here to the bottom with no names or anything. Our objective is to make the most money, and generally who makes the most money are the players that go to Eastlake. So I took the 30 players that went to Eastlake, and I took where they ranked in each category. Strokes gained total, strokes gained off the tee, approach, around the green, putting, opportunities, all the way across, even the specific proximities, the specific lengths of par 3s and par 4s, par 5s. Now, the only thing I didn't do was the length of putting. I left it at strokes gained putting. I didn't do putting 5 to 10 feet, 10 to 15, anything to that effect. I just left it at strokes gained putting. However, the purpose of this was to see what players, who the 30 best players that played last year, the ones that made it to Eastlake, what really did they excel at? What do I need to focus on? And I found some interesting observations. Number one, obviously, the lowest was strokes gained total. They averaged the 24th, or being ranked 24th in strokes gained total. So again, those 30 players: Scotty Scheffler, Cam Smith, Will Zalatoris, Patrick Cantlay, Rory, Xander, all the way down. Skip a few people. Davis Riley wasn't there. Tagala was. A couple of people in here weren't. I don't think Keegan Bradley was at the Tour Championship, but generally speaking, the top 30 players, where did they rank in each of these categories? So strokes gained strokes gained total, they were 24th, and that was the best. That was the lowest number. You can see here, strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained approach were 8th and 9th. So very, very clearly, the players that made it to Eastlake were ball strikers. They were not short game players. They were ball strikers throughout the entire year. And by a very wide margin. I was more shocked that off the tee was slightly more important than strokes gained approach, but it was 46.6 to 47.4. And they're 8th and 9th. They're right next back to back. But overall, you wanted to target ball strikers last year, and I've always been that kind of analyst. That's why I always harp seemingly every week that I focus on strokes gained approach as opposed to strokes gained putting, because putting is so fickle. Look here, putting was 23rd. It's about midway. There were 44 statistics that I gathered. Putting was 23rd. Around the green was 29th. So ball strikers were highly, highly favored going to Eastlake as opposed to short game players. Now, the cream of the crop, the Rorys, the John Rahms, all of that, they're good at a lot of things. They're very good ball strikers, and they're good in putting and short game and all that stuff. But if you're going to focus your attention on one particular player, I am highly suggesting you focus on drafting, choosing ball strikers as opposed to short game players, because putting is fickle. It comes and it goes. As we scroll across, the third and the fourth most, well, I don't know why it did that. My mouse is just going haywire. The third and the fourth most important factors for the players that made it to Eastlake last year: birdies or better was third, birdies gained was fourth, and bogeys avoided was fifth. So scoring. And that makes a whole lot of sense. And there is quite a bit of difference between fourth, birdies was a 30.4 versus a 36.5. Doesn't sound like much. It is. That's a lot. From fourth to fifth, even though it's one place, there's a lot of a gap in there. Meaning that you want to target players that are more apt at getting birdies as opposed to avoiding bogeys. Those are two different skill sets. Understand that. There are players that like to go low, And there are players that are very good at getting par. These are generally better in majors and better at difficult courses. So bogeys avoided was 5th, but it is pretty far back from birdies. But number 2, and this is why I stress it all the time. I feel like I stress it all the time. I feel like a broken record. The number 2, the second most important factor among the 30 players that made it to Eastlake last year was par 4 scoring. And when you think about it, it makes sense. 70% of the holes that these players play are going to be par 4s, but I feel like it often gets overlooked. Par 4 scoring is just so astronomically important. I mean, even here, par 4 is 400 to 450 and 450 to 500, the most common length of par 4s on the PGA Tour. These two substats are more important than off the tee and approach were. 6th and 7th, 8th and 9th. Again, just interesting observations. Now, I'm not telling you to take somebody that is better at par 4s, 400, 450 over approach just because. It's more so I'm highlighting the importance of strokes gained par 4 scoring. So par 4 scoring was 2nd. Par 5 scoring was 12th. That's still fairly high. So you really want to be able to get players that are going low on par 4s or are good at par 4s. They take advantage of par 5s. Par 3s, surprisingly, okay. I mean, 15th, but you have a 58 to a 48. That's a pretty significant difference there. So par 3 started to lose importance very heavily. The funniest and the most backwards thing to me that I saw among all of the statistics that we gather at Fantasy National, again, I don't have the specific length of putting, so 5 to 10, 10 to 15, etc., etc. So those might be higher, but the stat that mattered the least. Look at fairways. It didn't matter. It really didn't matter. 42nd out of 44 in terms of importance with a 107. But you look at distance, it was 26th. Not saying that it's all that important, but in relation to distance versus fairways, distance was much more important than fairways. So that to me was a very interesting find, because you would want to think that if you can't find the fairway, you won't be able to hit your shots to attack the pins, but it was about distance, at least for the 30 golfers that made Eastlake last year. Let's see, elsewhere, proximities really weren't all that important. I mean, total prox was 17th under par 3s. Prox 200 plus was right under that. So clearly the most important proximity for the 30 guys that made it to Eastlake last year were the 200 plus proximities. How good were you from 200 plus? Because no other proximity was anywhere close in terms of rating or in placement. Par 3s, again, just not terribly important. 15th for the total. Then the most important par 3 was 175 to 200, just because it's the most prevalent, I'm sure. But par 4s, par 5s, very important. So I bring this up. I brought this up just to explain why I'm going to be targeting certain players that I am this year. It's around this. While, so what if a guy doesn't need, hit many fairways? Didn't really matter last year. As long as he can go low, as as long as he's a better ball striker, or he depends on his ball striking more than he does his short game. If he can go low, that's what really, really matters. As long as he is a distance preferred player as opposed to finding fairways. That's what last year's 30 really depended on, was distance. So there you go. I'll have this up in the back, or in the background, I should say. But what I did was started to do some math and do some comparisons. This here is the major category. So you see I won't have any, say, specific length of par 3s, par 4s, par 5s. Won't have any specific length of proximities. I just have the major category: strokes gained total, par 4, birdies, bogeys, opportunities, etc., etc. This was in that time period. You can see Rory was number 1 in total, number 1 in par 4s, number 1 in birdies. Birdies are better. Bogey, number 2 in bogeys. I wanted to see who overperformed their salary or underperformed their salary, meaning who played well and just didn't have the big paydays, or who had some big paydays but really got by with smoke and mirrors. So I'm going to sort this on a column I have over here off to the side, just total divided by salary. Then I'm going to go by player name. So when I go by largest to smallest, the players at the top here severely outplayed their salary, meaning that they were very, very good, but their salary is not very high. And of course, the top 3 are live because they didn't play often. Charles Howell, Sergio, and Pat Perez. But let's focus on the guys that we are going to want to take this year. So the number 1 player among this admittedly very crude metric is Jason Day. He is roughly about 120th most expensive in or among the PGA Tour players. You see his salary here, he's $1.1 million. But he was 60th best in terms of strokes gained total. There's a very big disconnect there, meaning that Jason Day should be the 60th most expensive player, but he's about 120th. Tyler Duncan overperformed. Cameron Percy, Mark Hubbard, Vaughn Taylor, David Lipsky, Nate Lashley, Callum Tarrant, Johnny Vegas, Alex Noren, and Ryan Blom are some of the top performers in this metric of how well did they perform versus where their salary ends up. At the other end of the spectrum, some of these players very severely underperformed, meaning they did not play well at all, but they made quite a bit of money. Nick Watney is your worst. He was one of the worst players on tour, but he still made $1.1 million, or close to it. Mackenzie Hughes, Kevin Stadler, Ches Reavie, Lucas Herbert. Lucas Herbert even has some green here. He was in the top half or so of the PGA Tour players. But he was about, looks like the 45th most expensive player, but strokes gained total wise, he was 143rd. So there's a strong disconnect there. Jonas Blix, Joel Damon, somebody else that severely overperformed. Garrick Higgo, Andrew Landry, Sung Kang. So there's a good list of players that severely overperformed. You can see like Sepp Straka here made $4.8 million. He's roughly the 20th most expensive player in terms of PGA Tour salary this year. But really, he was 102nd best in strokes gained total. You look at his ball striking, ugly. 92nd and 167th. That is ugly. Ugly, ugly. Didn't really go low. He didn't take advantage of the par fours. Look at the par four scoring here, or lack thereof. That is why this system is really low on them, because they didn't take advantage of the par fours, and really nobody except Joel Damon took advantage of the par fives. They were all doing it in putting, mainly. Luke List will never be a good putter, but you see a lot of green up here in the putting. Sepp Straka, good putter. Brian Gay, Andrew Landry was 31st. Lucas Herbert was the number 2 putter last year, from the Tournament of Champions to the Tour Championship. And I'm just low on these guys. Putting is so fickle. I will never ever depend on putting. But one of the first things I did was to do this crude comparison of salary versus strokes gained total, just to kind of get a feel for some of the guys that I might want to target, especially these cheap guys. Cheaper: Jason Day, the Mark Hubbards, Callum Tarrans, Alex Norrens. He's a little bit more expensive. I'm going to skip Daniel Berger for a particular reason we'll talk about later. Patrick Rogers. These guys that severely underperformed their salary. Their metrics are good. They just didn't cash that big payday. So that is for 2022. I've also gathered their fall statistics, their 2023 so far. That's why you can see Scotty Scheffler has 12 rounds. Will Zalatoris hasn't played. Cantley only has 4. Xander only has 4, etc., etc. So we have some data that we can look at there as well. But that was one of the first things that I did, was to make this crude comparison and to figure out what was very important for the guys that made it to Eastlake. As you can see, strokes gained total, par fours, birdies are better. I skipped 6 and 7. Again, remember, those are the par fours, 400 to 450 and 450 to 500. I just wanted to look at full views. I don't want to break anything out, specifics like proximities or specific lengths of par 3s, 4s, and 5s. The 30 guys that made it to Eastlake last year, this is what was important for them throughout the PGA Tour season. So I'll scroll over for you all so you can get a full view of it. It goes to fairways gained there. And then off to the side, that last column is that total by salary that I was giving you all. So with all of that, after doing that little bit of research and then realizing, okay, well, you want to focus on guys that take advantage of par fours, that go low, that are ball strikers versus short game players. After doing all of that research, I've kind of have a list here of some of the players that I'm targeting. But before we get to that, all right, so let me share with you my general strategies for season-long PGA drafts, okay? And again, this is mainly a focus on when you have a particular salary that you need to stay in range of. This isn't the snake draft, although it can apply to that, but more so, again, for your drafts that you can have as many players as you want, 4 to 50, as long as you're within the salary. The number one thing that I always look at, take the guaranteed money. Well, what's that mean? There is no guaranteed money, and you're right, there is no guaranteed money. In terms of the PGA, when I call something guaranteed money, those are the no-cut events. And admittedly, there used to be a lot more events that were no-cut previously. They've been slowly eliminated from the schedule. I'm talking WGCs. I'm talking the Tournament of Champions. These no-cut events where if you have a player playing, they're going to make money that week, regardless of whether they finish first or last. So target guaranteed money. Target players that are going to be playing in those events. Tournament of Champions. It's a big purse. It's a small field. So even if your player finishes last at that tournament, they're going to make about $70,000. Doesn't sound like much, and it's not compared to the winner of 2 point whatever million. But having somebody in that tournament is better than not at all, because they're guaranteed to make money as long as they don't withdraw. That's another thing we'll talk about here in a bit. But when I talk about target the guaranteed money, target the guys that are in the Tournament of Champions, that are in the match play, that are in any event that is a no-cut event. That is where the guaranteed money is. That's where you make a lot of ground on people, knowing what events are going to be played by the players who are going to be guaranteed in those fields. The second strategy that I have for you all is to maintain a balance throughout your roster. Balance risk and safety and your quantity versus quality. Maintain balance, risk and safety. You've probably heard the term, they are a safe bet, or they are, volatile but a high ceiling. There's a lot of different ways that somebody can be described. You do want a good share of safety players. And what I consider safety players, that doesn't mean a high floor, although that can be part of a player's profile as a high floor. But what I'm talking about safety is that their range of outcomes is small. They might, if they cost, I'm going to make math easy, if they cost 1 million, their range of outcomes is probably 700,000 to 1.3 million. It's a very small range. That is safety. You have a good feeling, you have a good idea of what you're going to get out of that player. It might not be a lot in terms of high, excess or high leaderboard finishes, but by the end of the year, that's about where that player is. And there is a lot of value in knowing your safety. But if you take all safe picks, you're going to miss out on the guys with the big upside that come out of nowhere and win. Last year was Cameron Young, and I missed on Cameron Young. He was in my top 10 in terms of Korn Ferry Tour grads, but I think he was 8th or 9th. I was not high enough on Cameron Young, and he was definitely a risk because you did not know what you were going to get out of him. So you have to balance risk and safety. You need to have some risk. And just like with safety being a low range of outcomes, risk is the opposite. This guy can make 200,000, he can make 4 million. That is a large extreme of outcomes. So you need to balance risk and safety. And a lot of times your risk is where, I say a lot of times, you're going to win or lose depending on if your risks hit, but you because most safety nets are going to be pretty even keeled. Some safeties might be a little bit, a little bit higher or a little bit lower, a better or a worse safety pick, but that's where they're a safety pick. You're going to win or lose based on your risk, but you cannot take all risks. Because if you do and you miss, you lost. You need to have some amount of guarantee. So guaranteed money and safety generally can go hand in hand. But if a player plays very well, say like a Sahith Theegala or a Cameron Young, they play well early, they get into those big tournaments with guaranteed money, like the WGCs and all that stuff, then that risk becomes a payoff. But at the same time, you need a balance between quantity and quality. So you have to be able to say, all right, well, if this player is a risk, but he's adding to my quantity, that's okay because I have a low amount of quantity. You need to have enough players to play tournaments to make money. So you can't just take a bunch of safe picks or very few safe picks. You have to have a balance here of quantity and quality as well. You're going to have to take a gamble on a 6K play if I'm going to use a DFS term. You're going to have to take some low-end price board risks, get some quantity in there, because that is where you're going to make a lot of hay on a lot of your contestants as well. So my number 2 strategy, or the second thing to keep in mind when you're doing these year-long salary PGA drafts, maintain balance, risk and safety, but quantity and quality as well. You have to maintain that balance. Number 3, it's pretty simple when you think about it, but when you're in the heat of the draft, it can get lost. So it's always important why I have that information handy. Here I have it in number of rounds played, but starts. A guy's not going to make money if he doesn't play. And I'm going to throw just a name out there, Patrick Cantlay, he's one of the best players there is. Sure, absolutely. But he does not play often. He does not play very often. So somebody like him versus somebody who's going to play a lot has the potential to make as much money or make more money because he plays more. But when you're in the mid to late rounds of your draft, or if you're at the bottom end of your salary pool and you're looking at players, like perfect example here, Tyler Duncan versus Cameron Percy. One player played 65 rounds last year. One player played 37 rounds last year. Now, they happened to make about the same amount of money, but given this example, given this enough times, if Tyler Duncan plays 65 rounds again this year and Cameron Percy plays 37 rounds this year, who would you think is going to make more money? I'm thinking it's going to be Tyler Duncan. So it's always important to know how much these players play. Whether that's events, whether that's the number of rounds, however you want it to denote it. But your players are not going to make you money if they don't play. So you have to get players that play often. That's why I'm generally pretty high on Sungjae, because he just plays a lot. Sahith Theegala, he plays a lot. P, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Same to you. Thanks for jumping in chat via YouTube. How was your Christmas? Hopefully Santa brought you everything that you wanted. You got no lumps of coal. You're staying warm in the chilly area of the country that you are in. It has been frigid here, but thanks for jumping in, chat, and a very, very belated Merry Christmas to you. How are things going in your neck of the woods? So there is number 3. Yep. That is that. I concur. It has been cold. Chestnuts roasting over an open fire does not sound so bad. So, and this honestly, even though I've labeled it number 3, it's probably the number 1 most important. Get guys that are going to play. Play. I cannot stress that enough. It's great to have Patrick Cantlay, but if he plays 14 events and you've got another player that's been playing 23, that plays 23 times, sure, the player that plays 23 times probably isn't the player that Patrick Cantlay is. But if he makes the cut in half of those events, he's already made the cut in half of the events that Patrick Cantlay is just playing. So hopefully that makes sense. But get players that play. Starts, rounds, events, however you want to denote it to yourself. Get players that play. Number 4, know the numbers. Well, that sounds stupid, Nick. That's why I come to you. You're the numbers guy, or there's so many numbers. What do I mean by specifically know the numbers? Know these numbers. The OWGR, the official world golf ranking. Those are important. Know the FedEx Cup numbers. USGAA, etc., etc. Know these different numbers. Why is the official world golf ranking so important? Well, a lot of times that is what's used to determine who gets into a field. For example, my number 1 tip, target the guaranteed money. The WGC Dell Match Play takes the top 64 players in the world, according to the official golf world ranking. So number 1 through 64 gets an invite. If one of them doesn't play, the number 65, and the number 66, and the number 67. So, you might have a player, again, like Matthias Schwab, who has been playing well, but if he's ranked 200th in the world, and I don't know what he is, I'm just throwing out numbers, he might be 200th in the world versus somebody who might be a little bit more expensive, say a Justin Rose. But Justin Rose is inside the top 64. He's going to be making that guaranteed money. And you could have avoided that by knowing the numbers. Know the OWGR. Same thing, know the FedEx Cup. Again, the objective is to make it to Eastlake. So anybody who has played well in the fall has a pretty decent head start to making it to Eastlake. Now, yes, they have a whole summer, or, essentially winter and summer, January through August to play, so anything can happen. But guys who have had a decent fall, give them a decent little bump in your rankings, because they have been playing well and they're higher in the FedEx Cup. So, because of that, I had it up. Looks like I closed it out, unfortunately. So let's check the FedEx Cup standings, shall we? So some of these players you'll want to give a decent little bump to, because they're already ahead of their competitors in terms of needing the points to, one, make it just to the playoffs, making it to the playoffs, and then advancing to the BMW, advancing to the Tour Championship. But right now, your top 10 in the FedEx Cup are Seamus Power, Keegan Bradley, Mackenzie Hughes, Tom Kim, Brian Harmon, Adams Vinson, Max Homa, Russell Henley, Tony Finau and Rory McIlroy. Other players that are very close: Taylor Montgomery, Thomas Detry, Sahith Theegala, Putnam, Damon. Damon's had a huge fall. Matthew Neesmith, Patrick Rogers. Ricky's had a very good fall because he had one extremely good tournament. I think it was the Zozo where he finished 4th. So, know your numbers. Know where these guys stand in the FedEx Cup, in the official world golf ranking, because that is going to, or it should, determine who you target. It's great. Hideki, 116th in the FedEx Cup. Now he's a premier player, but he has struggled this fall. Tyrrell Hatton, Harry Higgs, there's Matthias Schwab, Matt Fitzpatrick. These players are pretty low in the FedEx Cup. They've put themselves behind the 8 ball, if you will. I'm not telling you to ignore Jon Rahm. He's only played 1 tournament. I'm not telling you to ignore Jon Rahm. But if you're asking me if I'm choosing between Jon Rahm and Rory McIlroy, they each have played 1 event. Right now, all things considered, I'm probably taking Rory, especially in a snake draft, because he is more ahead in the FedEx Cup. He's pretty much guaranteed himself a spot in the playoffs with that win. So know the numbers. And I'm not saying that Seamus Power should be the number 1 pick in your draft. He shouldn't be. But know the numbers. Give guys boosts that are high up in the FedEx Cup. Give guys boosts if they're high in the official world golf ranking, etc., etc. USGA I put in here, that's more for like courses. So knowing, for example, there's a Bermuda season, which is January, February, and March. And I talk about, we enter the bent grass season, particularly on the greens. That's June, July, August. Know the areas of the calendar where long courses start to be more trendy. When courses with water tend to be more trendy, etc. Know the numbers. Number 5 is pretty, plain and simple. You're doing this, yes, you want to make money. You're doing it to have fun. The best example I can give you is a friend of mine named Dave. Dave has a particular golfer that he just does not enjoy, and he does not want to root for him. He doesn't like the golfer. He will never draft that golfer, even if it means that his team is not optimal. Choose or draft who you want to root for. That way you're going to watch the golf tournaments. You're going to find yourself rooting for your team, for your players, and by watching, then you're going to pick up on who are some other players I should focus on, either for next year's draft or maybe for a tournament this year or later on this year, etc., etc. That's why I roster Luke Donald. Attaboy. Yep, that's right, P. Get you all them Northwesterners in there. Luke Donald, Fitzy, David Lipsky. Is it David Lipsky? Is he up in that area? I know Nick Hardy is. You've got quite a crew there that you can cheer on. I'm assuming your last round pick is Patrick Flavin, Flava Flav. But choose and draft who you want to root for. You're not going to enjoy it as much if you don't like a particular golfer, but you take him because you think it's optimal. And then if he struggles, you're really going to hate it. So choose and draft who you want to root for. So those are my 5 big tips or strategies, if you will. when talking about year-long golf salary leagues, number one, really starts. Just get players who play. Get players who play a lot. Yes, it's important to know the numbers. It's important to, know what events they're going to play and the guaranteed money and all that. Get players that play. Because if they don't play, they're not going to make any money. Doesn't matter. So get players that play. And as always, feel free to throw in questions in chat or reach out on social media in the comments of this video. Be more than happy to answer them. This is, again, as much as I can fit in already over an hour, but, just some overall thoughts as you prep for your league draft. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, let's move on to my top fives. And I have 3 lists here for you all. The first list I'm going to give you is the top 5 Korn Ferry Tour grads that I am targeting this year in terms of drafts, whether that is in a snake draft or in salary. Number 5, Thomas Detry. He's number 5, and he's on the cusp for me. There is a little bit of some rumors that he could go to live, and I don't know enough about, I'm not in the know of this guy's definitely going to live, he's definitely not going to live. I'm treating any player linked with live as an injury risk, essentially, because in my league, it's a 0. So I just consider him an injury risk. There's a little bit of a risk to Thomas Detry, but he's very high in the OWGR, so that means he's going to be in a lot of the bigger events. So he's number 5 for me, but he has not played well in this fall. Number 4, Korn Ferry Tour grad for me, Dean Burmester. Very high on Dean Burmester. I was very high on him in one of the tournaments this past fall. It didn't pay out. The guy can really play. He is just sitting just outside the top 50 right now in the official World Golf Ranking. If he makes it to top 50, he'll get into the Masters. He's very, very cheap. I think he's minimum priced for my league. Very high on Dean Burmester. Number 3, Ben Griffin. He's had a fantastic fall already, shown why he is going to be a pretty darn good pro. So number 3, Korn Ferry Tour grad for me, Ben Griffin. Number 2 is Justin Suh. He is fully exempt. He is exempt from the rookie reshuffle. He's exempt in any tournament he wants to play, he's going to play. So that's why I have Justin Suh ahead of Ben Griffin. He is fully exempt, and Korn Ferry Tour grads generally aren't. So that is a very powerful thing for Justin Suh. And he's got a lot of game. But the number 1 Korn Ferry Tour grad that I am targeting this year, no doubt about it, it's Taylor Montgomery. What's there to say? He's got 3 top 10s already in this fall. I think another 2 top 20s. The guy is ready to play on the PGA Tour and ready to win on the PGA Tour right now. I would not draft him in the first round. In the second round, I'm probably thinking about it because I don't think he's going to go. I think he's going to go very quickly. And in any kind of salary draft, he's a must-have because he's minimum priced. He's a Korn Ferry Tour grad. He's minimum priced, and he's 11th in the FedEx Cup. He's already, I think, top 60 in the OWGR. Gotta have him. Taylor Montgomery, number 1 Korn Ferry Tour grad. I'm understanding what I'm saying here. He's not Will Zalatoris, but I think he could burst on the scene like Will Zalatoris did. So those are my top five Korn Ferry Tour grads. My top 5 fades or players to avoid for various reasons. Number 5, A and B, Hideki and Daniel Berger. 2 premier players when healthy. You never know when they're healthy. If you have a strong feeling that they're both going to be healthy, then fire them up. And they definitely fit into the risk category. Absolutely. So if this is where you're willing to take your risk, that's your choice. That's the way you're building your team. Just understand that you need to build around them and build some safety in with them. For me, I am avoiding Hideki and Daniel Berger. Hideki, he's getting older. He just is. He's in his mid to late 30s now. And Daniel Berger, you never know when he's healthy. Past year, it was a wrist, and he's had some shoulder problems. He's had some oblique problems. It's the all-world talent. I don't want to have to deal with the injuries. Number 4, I am fading or avoiding Cameron Young. Now that doesn't mean I would not draft him, but understand what I'm saying here. He made $6.6 million last year, and if we go back to Fantasy National, and even though he has had a decent fall, let's look at Cameron Young and see what all he did last year. He had a stretch where he went third, second at a major, followed that up again with a second, and he had a second at the Genesis. He had 6, count them, 6 podium finishes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. That is astronomically unlikely to happen again. Even if he picks up a win this year, which I think he will. To ask a guy to get 6 podium finishes again, especially in a sophomore season where they call it a sophomore slump for a reason, I'm just out on Cameron Young, especially at his price of 6.6. Now, if you are playing in a snake draft and he falls, then you can start thinking about it. But I do not see Cameron Young being a first-round pick this year. Berger is Charmin soft. I don't know if he's Charmin soft, but he's got a lot of injuries. You're not wrong there. I don't know. I've got a soft spot for Daniel Berger. I just like his game. He's a ball striker and all that stuff, so he always rates out well for me. But I mean, the injury risk, I can't do it. But again, Cameron Young, 6 podium finishes. To ask a guy to do 6 podium finishes again, I can't get there. That's why he is a fade for the first round and probably the second round. Now, if he falls to me in the third round, I'll take him. Absolutely. To me, that would be fair evaluation or fair price for Cameron Young. But I'm not going to pay a first round pick, probably not a second round pick on Cameron Young either. Number 3, Scotty Scheffler, and that's simply because I do not see him winning 4 tournaments this year. If I'm saying the same thing about Cameron Young and 6 podium finishes, how can I pick a guy to win 4 times again? I don't see it. He could win 1, but 1 tournament, even if it's a major, isn't going to be $14 million. And that's what he made last year. And that's what he's going to have to accrue, especially in a salary style format, for him to be return even on your investment. There's just too many ways to spend that $14 million than on Scotty Scheffler. And we've seen him, he struggled a little bit at the end of the year last year. Struggled a little bit in this fall. He did pick it up a little bit. I still think he's, top 5, top 10 in the world. I think he was on a big heater last year. So I've cooled off on Scotty Scheffler. I'll spend a second round pick on him, absolutely. I'm not going to spend a first round pick on Scotty Scheffler. I just don't see him doing $14 million again. I don't see him doing $10 million this year. $7 million's being aggressive. It was a career year for Scotty Scheffler, I think. Number 2, we talked a little bit about him last year. We talked a little bit about him earlier in the night. It's Sepp Straka. we'll come back over to here. I'll have to change the page view for you. Sepp Straka was, gosh dang it, one of the worst performers in terms of strokes gained total versus salary. He was outside the top 100 in terms of strokes gained total. But yet he is about the 20th most expensive player. $4.8 million. But outside the top 100 in strokes gained total. Now, his birdies are okay. He's not a ball striker, and I prefer ball strikers. Again, he did a lot with putting. And I don't trust putting week over week, year over year, unless you've consistently shown it, like Denny McCarthy, Adam Hadwin, Brian Gay, etc., etc. Now, if he finishes, top 20 again and has another, even a 3.5 year, I might start to reconsider. But I don't see these numbers. To me, don't scream repetitive for Sepp Straka. I don't see it. So my number to avoid is Sepp Straka. Not going there. Don't like the player profile that I see there. And number one, my biggest avoid for 2023 is Mito Pereira. I love the player. Love the player. He showed out at Southern Hills, should have won it, all that. Too much live rumor. Too much rumors with live. I think he's going to live at some point in the year. I could be wrong. That's the risk I'm willing to take. But I am staying away from Mito. So, honorable mention fades for me: Patrick Cantlay, Adam Scott, Xander Schauffele, because I think they will go to live eventually. Whether that's this year or not, I don't know. I'm staying away from any live player because the league that I'm in treats any live golfer as a zero, and you can't take a zero. You can't take a literal zero. So I am out on Mito Pereira. Too much live rumors. All right, the last list I want to show you is my top targets. Top targets and must-haves. Mentioned to number 5 already, Taylor Montgomery. He is minimum priced, or at least he is in our league because he's a Korn Ferry Tour grad. Number 11 in the FedEx Cup. Already in the at least top 70 in the OWGR, probably even higher. Gotta have him, Taylor Montgomery. Number 4, Jon Rahm. Now, he's one of the most expensive players, yes. But of all the players that are expensive, we looked up here earlier, the Jason Days, Tyler Duncans, all this stuff. Tommy Fleetwood here at 2.9. The highest, quote, premier player in terms of strokes gained total versus his salary was Jon Rahm. Followed closely by Justin Thomas. But Jon Rahm is more than $1.5 million cheaper. Again, this is on a focus of a salary league, not a snake draft. So Jon Rahm, for me, I have a very strong feeling that he's going to bounce back in a big way this year. I'm not telling you he's going to make $14 million. I would not be surprised if he makes $8 million. I think he wins a major. I think he wins a second tournament, whatever that could be. The ball striking, first and off the tee, top 50 approach. Number 2 in greens, he goes low. I like Jon Rahm a lot. And yes, Justin Thomas is rated higher. He's number 4. But when you consider in the price at 6.9, almost $7 million, versus a 5.3 of Jon Rahm, who's 8th, and they're essentially on the same level to me. I think there's a big 3, 4, maybe 5. Rory, Rahm, JT. I'd probably throw Xander in there and Patrick Cantlay. And you know how I feel about Xander and Patrick Cantlay because of the live rumors? Fitzpatrick probably belongs in there as well. Just give me the guy that's cheapest, and that's Jon Rahm. If Justin Thomas was 5.3, I would say give me Justin Thomas. Give me the cheapest guy, especially if his peripherals are strong like Jon Rahm's were last year. So give me Jon Rahm. So he is my target or must-have number 4. Number 3, Adams Vinson, and I'm a little bit late on him. I was pretty high on him last year. He did not play the strongest. It was an okay rookie season, but not the strongest. And he comes out and wins the RSM this past fall. The last tournament that was played on the PGA Tour. I think that sets him up pretty big for a 2023, and he's cheap. He's $1.3 million, at least in my league. $1.3 million on a guy that is going to be in all the big tournaments now because of that win, including the Tournament of Champions. He is rising in the OWGR. There's a lot to like with Adams Vinson. It's the value of getting someone in those big tournaments, the guaranteed money, with a decently high OWGR cheap. So Adams Vinson is somebody I'm targeting. Number 2, I think everybody and their brother is targeting this person, but just because it's obvious doesn't make it wrong. Tom Kim. If you are playing in any kind of salary league, Tom Kim is must-have. Number 1, first player you write down is Tom Kim. He's less than $3 million. He made, I think, 2.9 last year. You expect him to be 100% owned because he should be. Tom Kim, gotta have him. If you are in a snake draft, you might have to reach into the back end of maybe even the middle of the first round to get Tom Kim. He is popular. He's very good. He's already 15th in the OWGR. He's in every big tournament. He plays quite a bit. There's a lot to like with Tom Kim. You need to have him. You got to be a little uncomfortable reaching up for him in snake drafts, and you start your team there. Don't care. I know he's only number 2 for me. Start your team at Tom Kim. That was the first name I wrote down when I started building my team for this year, Tom Kim. But my number 1 target, and this is where I'm at, I talked about it all fall. Last year at the Ryder Cup, Scotty Scheffler showed out, beat Jon Rahm in singles, had a humongous Ryder Cup, and goes out and has the year that he did. Cam Davis plays in the President's Cup. They don't win, but he had a very strong President's Cup. Goes out and wins on Sunday. I don't remember who he beat. Might have been Tony Finau. I don't remember. He comes out and he plays extremely well again in the fall. I'm not telling you he's going to make $14 million. I think this is a big year for Cam Davis. I think the President's Cup is just like the stepping stone that Scotty Scheffler had. I think Cameron Davis uses the President's Cup in that form. And Cameron Davis has already won on the PGA Tour where Scotty Scheffler hadn't. I am extremely high on Cameron Davis this year. I will reach as high as I need to try to get as much Cameron Davis in my lineups as I can. I don't know if I'd be willing to go into the first round, but I will spend a second round pick on Cam Davis. I'm that high on him. So my number 1 target this year is Cam Davis. For you, it should be Tom Kim. It probably should be Tom Kim. But I am extremely high on Cam Davis, and we will see at this time next year if this is going into the good calls or bad calls section. But that is what I have for you all tonight. Quite a longer show. Apologies for that. Gonna be getting back into the streaming mindset and all that, trying to keep these to an hour, but with season-long leagues, lots of questions, lots of things to think about. Wanted to show you how I prep for mine, some of the thought process that I go through, all of that stuff. As far as a schedule, Friday night, the Friday Night Chill Stream will be back. Not sure yet what we're going to be doing. Might be doing some more salary league prep. Might be doing some baseball, as I have gotten some more baseball information. So maybe update some rosters, see how rosters look, who we might want to target in terms of DFS or leagues early on for MLB. But Friday night definitely is back on, Friday Night Chill Stream. And then starting Sunday, it is time for the Tournament of Champions. So Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday will be the initial research, the data dive, and the DFS tactics starting next week. And if that changes, then I will make sure to put that on social media. So give me a follow at those places. I'll definitely have it for you Friday night as well, if the schedule changes. But Tournament Champions coming up, so looking forward to it. Hope you enjoyed the show. More importantly, I hope you had a very, very Merry Christmas. Spend it with friends or family, that you stayed safe, that you traveled to and from. And if you weren't able to travel, in James's case, hopefully other plans were made that you were able to enjoy the Christmas holiday. You did not get lumps of coal, but instead Santa was very good to you. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Hope everybody had a fantastic time off. Hope to see you Friday evening for the Friday Night Chill Stream. If not, back to the regular schedule next week as we jump into the PGA Tour season. With all the bets that you've made over this time, hope they've all been profitable.